Okay, key concept 1.2, the Neolithic Revolution and early agricultural societies. The Neolithic Revolution is huge. Roughly 10 to 12,000 years ago, the advent of farming created new socioeconomic systems worldwide. The key thing to understand about the Neolithic Revolution, Neolithic means new Stone Age, Paleolithic, Old Stone Age, is that the Neolithic Revolution drastically changed the world in several ways, and we're going to talk about that. Man learned to domesticate both plants, and here you see with some type of grain, and animals. And this changed the way they lived. No longer were they hunter-foragers, but they stayed in one's place. Populations increased. That gave rise to the growth of cities. Cities gave rise to the growth and beginning of civilization. Some of these early villages on the Blue Danube, here you see about 9,000 years ago. But Çatalhöyük, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correct, and Jericho were some of the earliest settlements where man lived in large numbers. And we're talking around 50,000 people. But this is because of the Neolithic Revolution. Agriculture emerged in several places around the world during this period of time, not exactly at the same time in the same place, and that leads to the discussion whether this diffused from place to place, which some did, but most of it did not. Most of it occurred independently, and you're going to have to know these places: Mesopotamia, aka the Fertile Crescent, Nile in the sub-Saharan part of Africa. Oops, let me go back one. The Indus River Valley in India, the Yellow or Huanghe River Valley in China, Papua New Guinea, and Mesoamerica in the Andes here on this part of the world. You see in this map the Neolithic River Valley civilizations. Once again, the Nile River in Egypt, Nile River Valley, Mesopotamia, the Indus River Valley in India, the Huanghe or Yellow River here, Papua New Guinea, Mesoamerica, and the Chabin here in the Andes region. A couple different maps are going to show you this. Here you see agriculture emerging 5,000 to 500 BC. Once again in these river valley civilizations. And I use the term river valley, and it's important to know that this is important, that river valleys would flood annually, and the debris and the flooding would produce rich soil, which was perfect for farming. You see the different types: bananas, barley, corn, cotton, and the different areas where they developed. Also in this part of the world here, the Olmec and the Chabin. The river valley civilizations, as we said, along the Yellow River, Yangtze River, Huanghe River up here, they would flood annually. This would produce fertile ground. Here, Harappan and Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus River Valley, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers here in Mesopotamia, and the Nile River here in Egypt. And this led to the growth of agriculture. Just another map showing the same things in the first civilizations that occurred there: Egyptian, Sumerian, Indus, and Shang. Pastoralism. Pastoralism developed at various sites in the grasslands of Afro-Eurasia. It's often overlooked in the hunter-forager dynamic. People tended to herd animals. They herded animals. They raised sheep. They raised goats. They raised pigs. They raised cows. And they followed the migratory patterns of these animals. They went from them to grassland to grassland. One of the big migrations that is very controversial is that of the Indo-Europeans. The Indo-Europeans, nobody really can quite agree on one theory of where they came from exactly, other than this area, and they did migrate. And with them they took their pastoralist views, basics of language and religion. Pastoralists, as we said, were nomadic. They followed the migratory patterns of their animals. They went from grassland to grassland where the animals could graze. They had interaction with people that lived in permanent settlements. They would trade some of their animals or their animal byproducts for things that people living in cities or settlements had. But then they kept moving. And very little has changed in some parts of the world. You see a modern picture here of pastoralists in Africa. Most people in Mongolia are still to this day pastoralists. So that is a way of life that even to this day still continues in some parts of the world. They are very key, and this is important to remember, in the spread of information, in the spread of technology, in the spread of culture, in the spread of ideas. Because they were still migratory, they went from place to place bringing these things with them. Here's another modern picture of pastoralists. This is in Mongolia. Still living the same lifestyle that they lived literally thousands of years ago. Another modern picture. This is in Kyrgyzstan, which is a part of the former Soviet Union. I know it looks like teepees in the background, but it's kind of interesting that Native Americans in North America would live in the same type of structure that these people would live here in Eurasia. The domestication of crops and animals. Different crops or animals were domesticated in the various core regions depending on what was there. That's the local flora, the local fauna. They quickly realized, hey, this grain produces food if I do this. This, if I plant the seed, will grow more. And from there, they figured it out. Irrigation, we need to weed, we need to bring water to it. Animals, if I have these two animals together, they'll have babies, which will produce more, which will produce more. It's a very simple concept. In Southeast Asia, you had rice. In Mexico, it was maize, which is a precursor of corn. In the Andes, it was the potatoes. In the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia, it was wheat and goats. In Africa, it was yams and cattle. Irrigation was crucial to this. Most people believe that the first animal domesticated was the dog. That's right. Oh, man's best friend. What's interesting is that bigger beasts of burden like cows and horses were used around most of the world, but in Mesoamerica and the Andes, they didn't have these. They didn't exist there, so they had to domesticate the llama or the alpaca, and they used those as their beast of burden, so to speak. This map shows you the origins of the world's food crops and domesticated animals. These plants and animals have been widely redistributed, but they did not all occur, they did not all naturally begin in the same place. They diffused. We'll talk about the trade and interaction being a key theme in world history and how things were brought, some by these pastoralists, these nomadic people, from one place to the other. Another thing we'll talk about later is something called the Columbian Exchange. Agricultural communities had to work cooperatively. They had to work cooperatively to clear the land, create the water control systems or irrigation needed for crop production. Shifting cultivation or slash and burn agriculture was the easiest way to clear the land, but that still did include a lot of hand work. Irrigation, man had to manipulate the environment to aid food production. He had to dig wells. The quanauts were created. And the size of your civilization depended on your water supply because you needed water to drink, but you also needed it for crop production, steady supply. One other reason why some of the first civilizations developed in those river valley areas. Here you see people working cooperatively. Men probably building some protective barrier, women working in the fields. Anybody want to take a guess what they're growing here? It's rice. Okay, I can tell you now, it's rice. And this was a big communal effort right here. It took a lot of cooperation. Here you see all the aspects of domestication of plants and animals. This is the Sumerian civilization. You see them raising animals. You see them planting crops. You see the irrigation canals dug here. And it's real simple formula. Population increased during the Neolithic Revolution. More food equals more people. A steady supply of food, because if you grow your own food, it's a steady supply. If you're a pastoralist, a hunter-gatherer, well, sometimes you get lucky and you catch something, sometimes you don't. So the more food, obviously, the more people. All right, that's a big thing that you need to remember. Another example here of people living in a Neolithic society in a village. You see a few new things here. You see metalworking or metallurgy. Man did slowly begin how to use different metals, tin, copper, later on bronze, and then iron and steel eventually. Here you see creating fire, working with metal. You see people back here baking breads, blah, blah, blah. But these are all important developments in civilization. There's an environmental impact to be discussed here as well. Environmental impact of agriculture and pastoralism. These practices drastically impacted environmental diversity. Pastoralists also affected the environment by grazing large numbers of animals on fragile grasslands, leading to erosion when overgrazed. In ancient Mesopotamia, it used to be referred to as the Fertile Crescent. The land between the rivers, that's what Mesopotamia means, was lush. I mean green, beautiful, golf course-like. But they over-farmed it, they over-grazed it, and now, I mean, when you look at Iraq and Iran and parts of Mesopotamia, it's desert. I mean, it ruined it. So man definitely had a negative impact on the environment during this period of history. Pastoralism and agriculture did lead to more reliable and abundant food supplies, thereby increasing the population. Surpluses of foods and other goods led to specialization of labor. And when you look up the definition of civilization, there's quite a few things that need to occur to consider something a civilization. One, you got to live in a city. That's the first thing there. But specialization of labor also is something new. You have new classes of artisans, of warriors, the developments of elites, religion, and priests. By job specialization, we mean that one person worked solely, specifically, in doing one job. Not like those people pre-Neolithic Revolution that were all egalitarian, that did everything from hunting and gathering. Everybody helped in. No, no, no. People specialized in doing one thing. I make pottery. I make plows. I make textiles. I'm a farmer. I'm a rancher. I'm a warrior who protects people. I'm a priest who organizes and counts and stores the food. So that is a key component of civilization. Technological innovations led to improvements in agricultural production, trade, and transportation. So we see a lot going on in the Neolithic Revolution. Domestication of plants and animals. Pastoralism, where people are disseminating ideas and goods. Irrigation, environmental impact, population increase, job specialization. People had time to work on other things because they didn't always have to worry about growing or catching their own food. But agricultural, trade, and transportation improvements really were the result of technology. Pottery. What was the purpose of pottery? To store food. If you're going to grow food, you need a place to store it so it'll last you throughout the year. Plows is a big improvement when it comes to farming, tilling the earth. Now, some of the collars that you would expect to see on horses and cattle weren't developed until a later time, but plows were. Woven textiles, that's cloth, fabric. Clothes to wear, blankets, things to sleep on. Metallurgy, what a huge technological improvement this was. Tin, copper, bronze, later iron. These things were used not only as weapons in war, but they were also used in agriculture. An iron plow is going to work a lot better than a tin or a copper one. The better the metal, the better the tool. And then, of course, wheels and wheeled vehicles. It was huge, big innovation. You see up here pictures of ancient pottery. Okay, that's to store things. The plow, even in ancient Egypt, was used there. Metal workings, metallurgy. Let's take a look at here. These people aren't doing what you think they're doing. They're actually blowing oxygen into a furnace. This is an old piece of pottery, the moche. The moche were in South America, and blowing oxygen into the fire actually makes it hotter. You see the same thing repeated here in metalworking. You have to reach certain temperatures to heat up certain metals. The Chinese over here were very advanced, ahead of other groups of people when it came to metallurgy and metalworking. And even in Africa, the Bantu people had a very good grasp on metalworking, which they spread throughout the African continent. Then there's the wheel, the game changer. Holy mackerel, this is big. Now you had wheels that you could use to carry things. You could carry more on these vehicles. This was a huge improvement in transportation. You didn't have to carry it on your back. Eventually they found that animals could pull these wagons or these carts. And this was huge, a game changer. One of the biggest inventions ever right there, the simple thing called the wheel. In both pastoralist and agrarian societies, you start to see social stratification. Elite groups accumulated wealth. They created more hierarchical social structures. That means from the top down. And they began promoting patriarchal forms of social organization. When we talk about patriarchy, that is male dominated. Okay? So here in the beginnings of civilization, during this period of time, in these first cities and these first civilizations, you see a king or a ruler. You see a soldier who's meant to protect. And these are mostly men, male-dominated, patriarchal positions. Priests served not only a religious function, but they also did the writing, the record keeping, things of that. And you start to see class structures emerge. So this is a big break from before Neolithic times when everything was egalitarian. So ladies, here's where you start to lose some of that equality at the very beginning. In ancient China, you could see that they did have a class system with the emperor, then the palace court, government officials, then peasants. And it's kind of interesting here that peasants were seen as pretty productive in Chinese civilization because they produced the food. And then below that, artisans, and then the fourth class merchants, and at the bottom, slaves. Okay, so slavery did exist in every single civilization and society. Social pyramid in ancient Egypt, you had the pharaoh at the top, your government officials, then your soldiers, your scribes, your people who did the record keeping, and that's one of the key components of civilization. Then you have your merchants, the merchants who traded goods, craftsmen who made things, then the peasants, second from the bottom, and at the bottom, slaves. So it's a little similar to ancient China, but different, especially when you look at where the peasants are. And what's interesting to remember about this is these civilizations developed independently from one another. They didn't copy one another. There was no interaction between these people at this time, yet they all kind of developed along the same pattern. They formed the same social structures and hierarchy. Even in the Indus River Valley, you have, mouse is messing up on me again. You have the Aryans, who were a group of people that migrated into the Indus Valley. They weren't the original settlers of Harappa or Mohenjo-Daro. They were white, so to speak, and they brought with them what is known as the caste system. The caste system we'll talk about more when we study Hinduism. But at the top, there is a strict social structure. Brahmins at the top, warriors, then your herders, farmers, and merchants and craftspeople, then at the bottom, workers, servants, and laborers. And in Mesopotamia, they had a social pyramid as well. The nobles are the ruler, followed by priests, commoners, farmers, and then at the bottom, slaves. So with the beginning of civilization, it's safe to say that you have the beginning of social stratification, the loss of egalitarian society and equal society, and everything follows a patriarchal form. That means male dominated. Male at the top, the status of women starts to get reduced.